Landlords in New York have figured out a way to get around the law banning them from rejecting Section 8 tenants. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's actually an opinion piece, and it's coming from the tenant's perspective. So obviously, this is a landlord channel. I cover a lot of landlord related issues, right? And one of those topics that I come across a lot is Section 8. Now, I am not opposed to the Section 8 program, but I understand why a lot of landlords, they just don't want to deal with it, and they would rather just get market rate tenants and get the people, that they figure best qualify to live in their properties. Now, in places like New York City, they actually have laws in place that make it illegal for you to reject people based on their source of income. Specifically, if you're using a Section 8 voucher in order to pay part of your rent. So, like I said in my previous videos on this topic, landlords will figure out other ways to reject the tenants that are, with these vouchers. It might not be specifically that, hey, we're rejecting Section 8, but we're rejecting you because you have Section 8. No, what happens is they had to figure out a workaround. If they didn't want to deal with Section 8, they still don't do it, okay? And one of the ways they're doing that up in New York is putting these income requirements on new tenants, right? So I have income requirements on all my rental properties, okay? All my tenants must make at least 3 times the monthly rent in their monthly income, okay? So if my rent is $1,000 a month for my unit, then the tenant has to make $3,000 a month, okay? Now, obviously, if you have a Section 8 tenant in your property, they only have to cover, I believe it's 30% of the rent total. So if, for example, if my rent is $1,000 a month, they only have to cover $300 of that, and then the voucher covers the other $700. Now, what they're doing up in New York is they're not counting the amount that the voucher is paying as part of the income for the tenant, and that is their little workaround so that they can say, okay, we can reject this tenant over here. And the person who wrote this article, they got a real problem with that, obviously, right? But like I said before, if a landlord doesn't want to take Section 8, they're going to figure out some way to get around the system and not take it, okay? Just because you try to change one little piece of it so that they, that you can't be rejected for this reason, well, I can still reject you for that reason, be it credit score or income requirements or whatever. Now, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know your opinion of landlords doing this sort of thing. Do you think it's right that in places where rejecting a Section 8 tenant because of their source of income is illegal, do you think it's right that landlords still don't want to take these kind of tenants and figure out other ways to reject them? I mean, I think it's okay. Okay, that's the honest truth. I think landlords should have the right to make the decision overall whether they want to deal with this government program. It's a voluntary federal program, and these cities and states that are putting these regulations in place that is trying to force a landlord to take a tenant that they just don't want, it just doesn't work, okay? And instead, you're the property owner, you should have certain rights. And my personal opinion is you should have the right to reject these sort of tenants if you want to. Now, this article is coming from citylimits.org, and it says, Opinion, How Income Requirements Harm New York City Voucher Holders. And as I said before, this is a very, tenant friendly article. Okay, so I'm going to throw my opinion in there and let you know exactly what I think as I'm reading it. So let's get into it. Fair housing laws in New York aim to offer protections to voucher holders and ensure that denying them the ability to use their voucher for an apartment is a form of illegal discrimination. However, real estate companies that operate in bad faith continue to avoid renting to those who have housing vouchers. The kind of discrimination whereby some of these companies simply outright reject tenants because of their vouchers is widely known about and reported on. In fact, our organization, Housing Rights Initiative, investigated these real estate companies and filed a lawsuit against 88 landlords and brokers in New York City. Yeah, I don't know if it's the same 88 I think it is the same that I had heard about before, where they filed these lawsuits, and what they were doing was they were calling up listings that they saw online or in a rental listing area, and just asking them straight out if they took Section 8, or maybe they were looking at the listing and the listing itself wrote right in it, hey, we don't accept Section 8. And then they were turning those, suing them for that right there. And, that's kind of like oh yeah, we got you, we're suing. But it's, to me, they're just out there trying to make a name for themselves, make a political name, and they're not actually helping anything, okay? Because the company, they're being honest. They're saying, hey, we don't want Section 8 tenants in our units. But if they didn't say that just straight to your face, you come in, you fill out the application, you pay your application fee and all that, and then they would just reject you. And anyway, for a different reason, maybe, oh, well, your credit's not good enough, or you don't meet income requirements or whatever. And that wastes your time and it wastes theirs. And, I would rather them just be honest and straight up front and just say, hey, we don't want you in here. However, an even more insidious form of discrimination threatens to decimate the Section 8 program as we know it. Realtors and landlords are finding ways to reject voucher holders with essentially no consequence through the setting of exorbitant income requirements. What are income requirements? Many landlords, brokers, and property managers in New York City require an individual's gross annual income to equal 40 times their monthly rent. Most New Yorkers make significantly less than what's needed to rent in New York City and in many neighborhoods. One would have to make more than 100% of the borough-wide median income to simply qualify for an apartment. Yeah, we put those income requirements in place for a reason, because that gives us the best chance that our tenant is going to pay their rent, okay, and be able to pay their rent without facing financial hardship. And I know that's not always cool for people, because it makes it harder in order to find a place that you could afford, especially for the super low income people, right? But that's the rules we have to play by. Otherwise, we get burned. And that's what a lot of these people don't seem to realize is, hey, we are doing these things to protect ourselves from getting burned. Why? Because we have been burned before. And we make this exception to the rules, and guess what happens? We lose thousands of dollars every single time. So how do income requirements affect voucher holders? There are a couple of different scenarios a voucher holder could find themselves in. What if a realtor or landlord tells a voucher holder that there is an income requirement of 40 times the rent or greater to lease the unit, and that the housing choice voucher would not be considered as a source of income? This realtor or landlord would be discriminating against the prospective tenant, as their income without a voucher would never be close to reaching the income requirement. That I don't consider that discrimination. I just consider that a blanket rule that, simply put, rejects people who cannot afford to live in your place. Now, that's the way it should be. Now, if that means that, hey, the Section 8 voucher holders aren't able to live in my place, well, so be it. Another more sophisticated form of income discrimination takes place when a realtor or landlord states that Section 8 would be accepted, but that there is an income requirement of 40 times the rent for the unit. In almost all cases, the landlord will set this requirement on the listed rent instead of what the tenant will be paying towards the rent. For example, if the rent for a unit is $1,500 and the tenant portion an individual would be contributing is $500, the calculation would be 40 times 500, equaling a required yearly income of $20,000, which would be a potential threshold a voucher holder could meet. However, most landlords will set an income requirement on the listed rent, which in this example would be 40 times 1,500, equaling a yearly income of $60,000, a much more exorbitant requirement. This application of an income requirement inherently prices out Section 8 voucher holders, regardless of the value of their voucher. Yeah, and that's another thing right there. Now, as I've said before, I'm not against Section 8, okay? I have Section 8 tenants in some of my units. And simply put, I believe that it is a better program than building government housing. Those commie block, public housing. I mean, I think it's awful. That's absolutely awful. However, landlords, they should have the right to be on board, okay? Whether they want to participate or not. That should be up to them. You know, it was up to me, and I did have to jump through a bunch of extra hoops in order to get it. But now that I've got my tenant in there, they stay. I have no problems with them. But did I get lucky? Yeah, maybe I did, okay? We all can say, hey, we got lucky when we have a good tenant. When we have a bad tenant, then, you know, all we can say is, hey, I got unlucky. But if you don't want to jump through those extra hoops as a landlord, you shouldn't have to. Now, you know, I see they're playing out, you know, these scenarios where the landlord is saying, hey, we take Section 8, but, you know, you still have to make this income, you know, this higher income requirement, right? So here's the thing, right? When we're doing our tenant screening, we don't, you know, differentiate depending on 200 different factors, okay? We make a really easy tenant screening thing and we put it in there, and if you don't meet those qualifications, you don't meet them. We're not going to change and bend them all the time, especially the larger landlords. They just can't do that. We have more tenants than we have units, okay? Right now, this is just a wonderful time to be a landlord if you're trying to fill your unit. I went over the fact that right now the occupancy level for apartments is, you know, the highest it has ever been. Okay, so we have more than enough tenants to fill up our units. Why would we want to have to jump through all these extra hoops for a Section 8 tenant if we could just get a tenant paying market rates, you know, who meets all of our qualifications, maybe even exceeds our qualifications, and put them in our unit, okay? We wouldn't. We would take the tenant without Section 8 over the tenant with Section 8 because we wouldn't have to jump through all those hoops, and we can get them in there a lot faster and start getting our money. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I'm not going to read the rest of this article. You know, it's just more, you know, a pro-tenant person complaining about the fact that landlords are in the business to make money, and we're only going to do what we want to do. We're going to figure out legal workarounds to all their ridiculous laws whenever we can, okay?